Welcome, everyone. I'm Stephen Henry Madoff, the chair of the MA Curatorial Practice Program at the School of Visual Arts in New York. Each week, we present interesting curators or institutional directors to talk about their practice. And today, we have a duo. I don't think I've ever had a duo before. Very exciting. So I'm going to read a short bio, just for you to know that they'll talk for about 50 minutes, at which point you can put a question or comment in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. I'll read those questions and they'll answer, presumably. So, their bio. Francesco Urbano Ragazzi is a curatorial duo founded in Paris in 2008 by Francesco Ragazzi, international PhD in philosophy, professor of aesthetics, and Francesco Urbano, PhD in film and media studies. Their practice aims to reconnect art with everyday contexts through exhibition formats that take place not only within galleries and museums, but also across public spaces and spaces shaped by the free market. Their approach is exemplified by a trilogy of exhibitions curated in Venice on the occasion of the Visual Arts Biennale. The Internet Saga by Jonas Mekas in 2015, the Hillary Clinton emails by Kenneth Goldsmith with the participation of Hillary Rodham Clinton in 2019, and Adoration by Pauline Cornier-Jardin and the inmates of the Giudecca Detention House in 2022. The duo has also developed projects for major institutions worldwide, including the MMCA in Seoul, ISCP New York, CERN, Geneva, Bucharest Biennale, the Reykjavik International Film Festival, La Casa Encendida in Madrid, and the Emirates Foundation in Abu Dhabi. In 2021, they co-edited Fuori, 1971-1974, an award-winning anthology dedicated to the first LGBTQ plus magazine in Italian history. Between 21 and 22, they directed the 17th Liaf Biennial in Norway. Between 23 and 24, they curated Jonas Mekas 100 with an exclamation point in Italy, the international program celebrating the centenary of the legendary filmmaker with whom they've long collaborated. In 2025, Francesco Urbano Ragazzi was named the first Italian curatorial fellow at the American Academy in Rome. And with that, welcome.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you, everyone, for joining this roundtable. We are very honored to be here. First of all, hosted by a fantastic MA in curatorial practice at the SVA. We would like to start maybe with a note on our name, on our persona. We started working together in Paris around 2008, and about 1 year later, we decided to merge our name and family names in one single entity, one single person. If you are familiar with Italian contemporary art, you know that Arte Povera artist Alighiero Boetti, at a certain point in his career, decided to split his name as if he was two people, two twins. So he started signing his artworks Alighiero and Boetti. And we decided to reverse this project, this process, to achieve the same thing, to overcome the idea of a single self. So we decided to become Francesco Urbano Ragazzi, what Annie Clark and Chalmers called an extended mind, a mind that not reside in the brain of someone, but it's more in between two bodies, as in our case. What we are going to do today, we are presenting two projects which are somehow related to a series of topics which concerns our practice, are at the core of our practice. Both projects are related to Venice and the Venice Biennale, and are somehow two exercises in pirate curating exhibitions during the Venice Biennale. And they are also related because they tried, through these projects, we tried to open a public space where there was not, where an unpredictable somehow public space, or a temporary public space. And we will see later what we mean with this. These projects are also related to how communication and media enters the practice of curatorships nowadays. And so there's also this third topic. We start now with our presentation, and we share the screen.
Okay, here we are. We are in Venice in 2019, and actually the show was like as we were mentioning before, it was part of this trilogy. And this was like the second chapter of the trilogy. So we started with Jonas Mikas in another unconventional space. I will say actually conventional, very conventional space. And in this case, it was another conventional place. But before going to the space, we give you the context, let's say the curatorial context. We met in New York some years ago, like 10 years ago or more, artist and poet Kenneth Goldsmith, and we had an immediate, let's say, affinity with him on many projects, and he started sharing with us some notes about what we was thinking, what we was working on as a poet and artist. Just a brief note on him. Kenneth Goldsmith is like the artist who founded the pirate archive called ubuweb.com, which is like an archive, a shadow archive of avant-garde films and artworks in general. So it's a sort of aggregator of contents that are very difficult to be seen. And in this case, it was like collecting all these works as a pirate operation. But then this pirate operation became something very institutional, and it became like a reference point for universities, scholars. And so in 20 years, from 1994 to 2024, and then later, still going on, this archive, which is still there, was really one of the main shadow archive for avant-garde. Then it was also working on what we called, let's say, the uncreative writing. And to be more clear, it's the idea of like, let's say, pushing the idea of ready-made into literature, and especially working on how we are immersed into a textual dimension, and how all these texts are some way part of a new epic, a new way of like spreading words and spreading narratives. And starting from these points, it came out with the idea of working on Hillary Clinton emails. So the emails that some way were at the core of the email gate that influenced deeply the history of America on the occasion of the election of the 2016. So it was like Trump against Clinton running for the election, and as you know, Trump won. And going back to these emails that were like became like very infamous, because at the beginning they came out in public discourse, because Hillary Clinton was basically sharing her own emails using a private account for as a Secretary of State. So this was like, let's say, not properly exactly legal for
gray area, let's say.
It's a gray area. And so the emails became public, and they were all published by the United States Department of Security. And then after that, they were like also, they became also searchable thanks to WikiLeaks. And then the third level was exactly the proposal that Kenneth some way launched. And the idea was to print out all the emails and look at them as an epical poem.
Yeah, as you can read, Kenneth asked us to search for a space, a museum, an institution at the beginning that was able to host this project. It was rejected a lot because, of course, for an art institution was quite a problematic project. Everybody was fearing a revenge, presenting in the case an institution decided to present this project. So we found a different space, a space on the island of Venice. This you can see a picture of the facade here. I'm sure that looking at this image, you are thinking probably that this is quite an interesting example of Venetian Baroque. This facade is surely inspired by the facade of the Cadoro, for instance. But if you assume this, you were very wrong. This space is the first building to ever been built in solid concrete on the island of Venice, and it was the first cinema theater to be open on the island of Venice in 1916. So somehow this facade is an imitation, a fake of Venetian Baroque, but it's a very modern building. This building not only has a very complex look, a very complex appearance, but it has also a very complex yet short history. At the beginning, as I said, the building was a cinema theater. Then it became a red light cinema theater. And as you can see from maybe from this black and white image, the theater was also frescoed by 5 artists from the Capesaro school in 1916. Then the theater became the venue, one of the venues of Ca' Foscari University of Venice. So the university decided to cover the frescoes with these white walls. And then exactly 100 years after the foundation of Cinema Teatro Italia, the space became a supermarket. So the company renovated the frescoes and placed their activity in this space. We were interested in this kind of spaces because somehow they represent the identity not only of Venice, but the identity of late capitalism and how culture is, or cultural spaces are transformed, used and misused sometimes. in this time of late capitalism. So we were interested in this building and to set our exhibition, Kenneth's exhibition of the Hillary Clinton emails in this space, first of all, as an act of what we called cultural reappropriation. So the act of reappropriating, even temporary, a cultural space eaten up by the market. We were interested in this space also because to us was the perfect representation of what some theorists call queer space, the many identities of this space, the many layers of identity piling up in this space, we think qualify it as a queer space. And in this sense, we referred to philosopher Paul B. Preciado, who stated that Venice itself is a queer, a trans city, a city in drag, a drag queen. So in this sense, we were somehow theoretically encouraged by Preciado to pursue this kind of mission.
And if we go into the exhibition space, let's say, we added actually, we played on the different transitions of this space toward the history, and also we some way added this new level. So there were like really a series of identities overlapping in this very space. We worked especially on three parts. So the first was the cinema itself. So we some way worked on the reactivation of the former cinema theater. And then the gondolas, which is the name that, I mean, this is how they call the corporation used to call these shelves in the middle of the space. And then there is the balcony, which is that we will call the gallery. And the balcony is, I mean, it was like the gallery that was active during when the cinema was functioning, and then became a sort of storage. So basically, we started a long negotiation with the company, and we obtained to work on these three levels. We have to, I mean, to underline the fact that if museums were extremely scared about this project, once a curator working in a museum told us, "You will be sued. You will finish in jail with this project." But then we, on the other side, proposing the project to this company, they didn't have any kind of fear about the contents, and the reaction was of a strange excitement. The excitement came from the idea of creating a sort of White House on the top of the supermarket. So basically, the gallery was reconceived, rearranged as a sort of lo-fi White House. And this White House was made of, like, we studied all the furniture, especially during the Clinton era, and we some way tried to transpose these shapes into furniture that then would have like hosted the Hillary Clinton emails. Here you can see also the imagery of the, let's say, of the Resolute desk, how it's very charged. And then on the other side, you can see Kenneth Goldsmith Loft in New York with all the emails in piles. So they were like the first, let's say, this was the mood at the beginning. Also, we studied all the replicas of the Resolute desk. This is like how the Resolute desk are produced in Indonesia. And then we let's say focused on all the elements in the rooms of the house, and we try to redesign them together with the artist. And so basically we worked on synthesizing the shapes coming from this, let's say, very very rich rows and elements from the space, and these were like, as I said, lo-fi versions, synthesized version of the furniture. For instance, this is the table. This is a marble table in the Oval Office. These are like references from the Bélanger sofa in the Blue Room. And again, we come back to the space, and our, let's say, association was immediate between the cinema and ubu.com, UbuWeb. And as I told you, this is like in a section of the website, there is an important archive of films and video, or better, copies of film as video, shadows of film as video. And so we decided to select some of them for a film program reactivating the old cinema theater.
Yeah, we were interested to associate Kenneth's work on UbuWeb and his project on the Hillary Clinton emails to underline how his practice was based on archiving and disarchiving materials. So that's why we created this association with two apparently separate parts of his work, of his practice. As you can see, the first operation we made was to print all the names of the artists collected on UbuWeb and put these prints on the top of the supermarket shelves. So names from the avant-garde directly confronted the many names of products coming from the market, the mass market. Another interesting thing we would like to point out before going back to the Hillary Clinton emails was that we tried to hijack as much as possible the production line of the company itself. So not only the company, we produce all the artworks through the company's means, but we also printed out a sort of guide to the exhibition, which was distributed with this magazine listing the offers of the supermarket. So the art project was coinciding somehow and employing the means of mass production and mass distribution. But let's go back to the emails. Together with Kenneth, we decided to present them in two different ways, so giving two different kinds of information to the audience. The first way in which we presented these emails is through this minimalist cube of prints. So the viewer could immediately feel the quantity of emails that generated such a huge scandal. These are more or less 60,000 sheets of paper. So you can see a view. An important thing to say is also that we decided to concentrate on the furniture of the White House because, as you know, each president of the United States is able to decide on some aspects of such furnitures. So they decide the kind of desk, the kind of carpet, the artworks, and this task is usually associated with the activity of the First Lady. So somehow, since Hillary Clinton at the time was in the 90s was the First Lady, the wife of Bill Clinton, the focus on this furniture added something to the portrait of her Kenneth was trying to achieve. Of course, we were not interested in doing propaganda. We were more interested in studying the aesthetics of power in the time of internet connection. The second way, you can see the pile of paper from above. And then here you are in the second part of the show, where the Oval Office transforms into a sort of public library. So people could access the exhibition freely while the supermarket was open and operating on the ground floor. And everybody was able to look through these books presenting the same emails in binded format. You can see there is another copy of the Resolute Desk also, where someone can also sit and impersonate the presidents.
And then the third part again was the cinema. So the balcony was looking at this theater, the cinema theater, but this was also some way a linking point between the two floors. So people downstairs doing their grocery could see the video projected on the wall, and same was from upstairs, from the Belanger sofa revisited. And so this was the view from above, and there was also a cinema program running there for the entire period of the exhibition, which was 7 months. So we basically invited. This was also a very challenging part of the process, because we invited the artists to participate in the show with a low resolution version of their films. So the films as they were on the internet, on Ubu Web. And so in this case, people were looking at the shadows in a large scale shadows on screen. On the other side, people were studying in the space. Also, our team was working on reading the emails, studying them, and we published a book with the best emails, and this was like a long process of research that some way was running there. Also, we tried to go back to the previous identities of the space, as said, and so we had like a public program for the 7 months, hosting like thinkers around Wittgenstein. So we had like a very academic series of conferences there. We had Paul B. Preciado who came for a conversation with us, and we had also people such as Rose McGowan from Me Too, Ray Ronaldo from Sonic Youth, people that came and some way participated in the narration of the show. Also, the show immediately got a lot of press and a lot of interest internationally. So there were like a lot of rumors around the exhibition, and also speculations about the meaning of this kind of operation. The first, also it was interesting, but it was of course very covered by the, let's say, the art system and the art magazines, but also some way, something like press, some like Al Jazeera or other major political platforms were very interested in the show, so they covered it. And this was like a part of the operation. It was very interesting to us that the show was not recluded in just in the art field. And the next level was then the fact that we had a series of like projections coming from the cinema, and then another projection.
Exactly. So on September 10, 2019, Hillary Clinton came and visited the show. And as you can see, she performed as herself, reading her own emails, sitting on the desk, and I'm quoting her, where she would never sit. So creating a parallel reality, referring to a very confusing and contradictory timeline. Real and fake were mixing together, but also present and a possible future or a traumatic past were merging in a single timeline, in a single image. And I have to say that we didn't search for it. We rather employed the exhibition itself as a tool for storytelling and dramaturgy, so as a sort of trap for reality to happen. So she was Hillary Clinton approaching us and asking more information about the show, and ultimately deciding to come and visit the show herself. And this, of course, created a sort of break in the daily life of the place, and also in our daily life. Of course, the news was reported globally. And again, we were interested in this resonance because we believe that it is part of the aura of the show, of this project, and it gives us the possibility also to understand once more how mass communication works nowadays. So what you are seeing now are some titles appeared on major outlets, newscasts, and you can see how the tone slightly changes. So conservative newspapers pointed out at how, for instance, Hillary Clinton was joking about her own role, while democratic outlets or outlets associated with the Democratic Party took another angle, and fashion and art magazines described this event as a performance. Of course, we are not interested in answering the question, what is it? What's really happening? What's the right narrative for this event? We are more interested in staying in the contradiction. And we think that navigating the contradiction is part of democracy, the ability of developing the value of democracy. So we are not answering about this question. What is it? What happened?
Yeah, and I mean, in this case, it's important to underline that we also agreed. I mean, the launch of the news came from us, so we had this agreement with Hillary Clinton and her staff about the fact that we had to launch the news under an artistic perspective, and then she could come later with like a more political statement. And so this is just to give you the idea of how also negotiation is very important in this kind of projects. And there were like at least two important levels of negotiation. On one side with the company, like the supermarket, and on the other with the team of Hillary Clinton. But then we go somewhere else.
What we wanted to achieve is also to break daily habits, so to make people aware of their habits in daily life. So the exhibition was really a tool for making people conscious of their role as social personas. Let's go to the second project we would like to present. It's a chapter of the Lofoten International Art Festival, an art biennale we curated in 2022. Since the time is short, I would directly skip to the Venetian part. The relevant thing is that you have to know is that the Lofoten Islands are an archipelago above the North Pole, and LIAF, the LIAF biennial, was one of the first biennials to think about how the production of big art events impact on our environment. LIAF was concerned from the beginning on this topic of sustainability, and somehow sustainability is at the core of the project we developed in Venice, in this space.
Again, we are in a very peculiar place, which is like linked to the history of Venice in the past, but also nowadays. And this space, it's like in the Giudecca Island, so right in front of the main island, and it's called Convertite. So a place connected to the idea of conversion. We will tell you more about this conversion, but going in the space, we are, let's say, in a cloister and in this old convent. So it's a convent from the 16th century, and there is also a church, and this church, the Church of Convertite, was had like some works, some artworks, pictorial works in the church, but then they were like dispersed and during Napoleonic time, and so most of the works are not there. For instance, the Adoration, which was the main triptych in the church, is now in Brera in Milan. And we decided to work on this space in a very on a specific part of this space, because we didn't tell you that this is nowadays a functioning prison. So the convent, where nuns in the past were like some way living, was converted into a prison, a functioning prison, a female prison. So again, women were like obliged to stay there. And this happened during the pandemic. So we were working on how in isolation people can some way react and create a sense of community. And this was, let's say, the more extreme part of our project, and the most extreme part of our project. And here we are in the main room where we decided to work on, which is like a very symbolic space in the facility, which is the visitation room. So where the inmates used to meet their own relatives and also lawyers and so on and so forth. The space was not active at the time because of the pandemic. So it was extremely charged also of frustration, of bad feelings. And so together with the cooperative working there, and with the inmates themselves and the director of the prison, so again, a lot of negotiation was involved. And we decided to some way intervene artistically in order to reinforce, empower, and the structure itself, and some way do an art piece, a public art piece for this very space.
It's important to say something about how we selected this space. So we really wanted to to revert the power structure of this institution. So we asked the inmates and then the officers working there and the cooperative working there, what an artist should do for improve artistically the lives of the inmates. So we treated the entire community as if it was a commissioner to our project. So we operated somehow like in the Renaissance, where a king or a pope decide to call an artist. And we did that not with a king or a pope, but with the inmates of the facility. So it was them to locate this place and to consider it extremely ugly and yet extremely important in their lives. So after we located this space, we invited a French artist, Pauline Courier-Jardin, to work with a group of volunteers, a group of inmates. And she started to tell stories, the story of the convent, in particular of the convent of the Convertite. Pauline Courier-Jardin discovered that the Convertite, this convent, was a peculiar one because the nuns living there were former prostitutes forced to become nuns and convert to Christianity. So it was a space of abuse and female abuse, especially. Once a year, however, the nuns were allowed to play in theatrical spectacles presented in the convent itself, in the parlor of the convent. They were allowed to dress normal clothes and even to play in drag. So the nuns operated what scholar Skippa Bazin called theatrical infractions to the rules of the convent. And with this idea of creating a theatrical infraction also for the prison, Pauline Courier-Jardin started a workshop with the inmates. So they started viewing movies together, and then they started drawing together, imagining a sort of party reuniting the nuns, the inmates, the officers. So a party which was able to somehow cancel every hierarchy between identities. So the inmates draw this imaginary during a series of workshops, and their drawings were then converted little by little, and with the help of local painters coming from the academia, from the art academy in Venice. So this space was converted, and the drawings of the inmates, were converted into a collective wall drawing, to which, of course, also the artists participated.
So let's say we had like a series of drawing sessions, and also, let's say, a film program, actually a very private film program for inmates, and a lot of like discussions with the inmates themselves, and all these let's say some sort of surreal strategy of like visualization, produce a series of images that then became the new decoration for the room. So the fresco that we produce all around the room, but also a new film Pauline produced, so in animation that was made for, and it's like, so the space, it's a cinematic space, became a cinematic space, is still a cinematic space, and it's conceived as a permanent video installation. This is like, these are some stills from the animation, and it was all donated to the prison. So this is like, this belongs now to the convertite permanently. And here you can see the, let's say, the exhibition views, and some details from the walls, and from the also the, let's say, the fact that there are like the old furniture that are some way coexisting with the new arrangement of the walls.
Yeah, for us it was important to go against the rhythm of the Biennale itself. As you know, the Biennale comes and goes every 6 months between art and architecture Biennale. So it's a machine that produces a lot of pollution in terms of discarded materials. We wanted really to counteract this kind of rhythm and create something permanent, something that ideally can last for centuries, and something serving a real community, a specific community, and let's say a local community.
And I would also like to underline that here we decided to open up the space just for 3 days, and we just for journalists, writers, people that could some way participate to the narration of the project. And so we some way used the opening of the Venice Biennale just to have like all the international press in town, and then let's say we opened the space, but then the space was like closed again. So it's still closed, and it's and the installation is like as the use of the installation, let's say, is like a privilege of the community living there. In a sense, we created also a tension with the outside, because people at the biennial were really freaking out, because they wanted to, I mean, at some point prison was some sort of very desirable place, so it's and it created the classic FOMO that you have during the biennial, and we wanted to play with it, creating a sort of magnetic field toward a place which is normally a place of exclusion, exclusion in a very different sense, not exclusion from a party, but exclusion from the political representation. So adoration, it's still there, and we hope still will stay there for the centuries.
So thank you very much. We stop the presentation now.
Okay, perfect timing. So this is the time for people to put questions in the Q&A, if you'd like. Let's wait a moment for that.
Don't be shy.
Okay, let's see. There's one. A long one.
Okay.
In 3 parts, no less. In an interview from a couple of years back, you mentioned that one of your dream projects would be to create your, in quote marks, ideal museum. Seeing that your practice seems so anti-institutional in a way, of course, creating an institution might also be the furthest point of institutional critique. Could you elaborate on this idea a bit more? Would you still be interested in doing something like that? And if so, what would the museum be about? Let's start there, and then we'll go to the next parts.
Okay. So, are we anti-institutional? I don't know. It's an open question. It's a question we also made to ourselves. What we can say about it is that we are trying to elaborate on the notion of autonomy of the arts that emerged notably with the first wave of avant-gardes at the beginning of the 20th century. And I think that we are switching through Jonas Mekas, of course, from an idea of autonomy to an idea of independence. So we believe that if art is truly autonomous, art is the real institution, even before art institution. So art is the institution of itself. And as such, it can be instituted wherever we want. So in a supermarket, in a prison. So what we are trying to do is really to create our own institution wherever we want, wherever we feel appropriate.
And talking about the ideal museum, which is like a good question, because we were talking about it, and we like to create ideal museums where we do the shows. So, for instance, really the supermarket in that very specific moment really became our ideal museum, because people, also the events happening in the space were completely unpredictable, but some way very, very, very close what art is all about. And so, yeah, absolutely, that's the ideal museum. But then talking about going on permanent basis, this is also what we are trying to do. I mean, we have our own agency, let's say we have our own company, and we created this like moving project, but we would love also to set at some point in a permanent space, or kind of permanent space, our activity. Why not?
Okay. There are a lot of questions, actually. So, second and third parts of Eliza's questions regarding Hillary, would you consider returning to the topic, seeing that public interest continues to surround such email scandals, the Epstein files being the most recent?
We are discussing about it with Kenneth, with the artist Kenneth Goldsmith. If we find a way, we'll be back on the topic.
Yeah. I mean, we are thinking about it because, I mean, we have proposal to rearrange the show in institutions, and we are, I mean, it's something that needs to be rebuilt.
It's a narrow path, let's say, because we don't want to. We're not interested in propaganda again. We're interested in how language works, these kind of questions. So that's why it's a narrow path to approach this topic in this very moment.
Okay. Part 3, how do you select the artist to collaborate with? And how would you describe your collaboration process with them, as it seems to extend beyond traditional artist-curator relationships?
Yeah, I mean, we start from a very, let's say, immediate affinity that we can. I mean, all the artists we like to work with are some way pioneers, or people that are challenging the idea of arts. And so this is definitely a starting point. So we have something. I mean, Kenneth was someone that was present in our life even before our meeting, our first meeting, and Jonas Mekas was really extremely important for also our education. But I will say the same with Pauline Cornier-Jardin, with Chiara Fumai. These are people that are some way informed our idea of extended mind. So in this close dialogue that we try to have with the artists, also we don't feel that that's the point. We don't are forcibly in the idea of the freedom of the artist. We like to discuss. We don't like the ideas of freedom. Freedom is like one of the big lie of the autonomy of art. Because in the end, there is no freedom, but there is, again, the possibility of negotiating and thinking together the best strategies to do an exhibition.
And also in the case of Pauline Courret-Jardin, Pauline's practice was already based on working with communities of women and somehow isolated or minoritized women. So I think that we select the artist based on how their practice can match a certain project.
Okay, next. I'm drawn to the idea of a duo, speaking of extended mind, to people functioning as a single unit as a way to explore what a super persona could be. We typically think of the individual as the basic building block of identity. So framing a pair as one persona displaces that norm. The question then is, how does this fused identity navigate the world around it? One possibility is that it resembles conjoined twins, perpetually bound together, constantly having to negotiate physical and social space with the person they're attached to, with little freedom from that dynamic. But another possibility is that this super persona actually unlocks new kinds of relationships, modes of connecting with others that a lone individual simply couldn't access. Did you try to explore these ends of the super persona? Great
Very
question.
interesting.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. I mean, I think that's very inspiring. I mean, we should go more into this kind of.
Exactly. We are trying to think about it a lot because we are also very different persons. We come from different backgrounds. We have different interests and even different attitudes. So for us, a core is really to this exercise in what we call, maybe it's a bit naive, but we call it democracy. So the idea of finding a term for living together. That's very important to us. Then now we are weirdly enough we are teaching here in Milano, and our course is about the aesthetics of corporation from one side and cooperatives from the other in the arts. So I think that these are also two interesting poles in terms of practices of collaboration, two different models, the corporation and the cooperative.
Yeah, and I think that the idea of a super identity or super mind, it's probably it's too big, too majestic. But I like the effort of like some way externalize our thoughts and discuss among us and with other artists. And I mean, all this process of thinking together, it's actually very, very hard. And so there is something super in this process.
Okay, next. I think I remember that the Pope praised the project in the women's prison as something that fused art with life and that showed concern for the lives of real people. Were you commissioned by the Pontiff, or how did you get that praise? And was this project something that reflects an interest in the avant-garde in the sense that Adorno proposed?
No, this was a very horrible side effect of our project. Our project was independent from the Venice Biennale, and it happened in 2022. Then an Italian curator called Chiara Parisi decided to gentrify the prison after our show. So she decided to locate it in the same facility through the Vatican Pavilion, but with a very different attitude, in our opinion, of course, because what she did was to create a very normal show one that started a bit at the beginning of the Biennale and ended at the end of the Biennale. So all the artworks were somehow thrown away. So basically, the prison was a sort of background for her show. The inmates, with the promise of a discount in their serving time, were asked to guide visitors during the 6 months of the Biennale into the show. So they were put in what we think is a very difficult position, and surely a serving position. Our point was exactly the opposite, to treat them as commissioners of the show. And also, it's important to say that that prison hosts is the house of about 60 people, maybe more now, but our time they were 60. And they came from 37 different nationalities. So imposing one cult was, in our opinion, again, a very violent act. So we are absolutely unhappy for somehow allowing this kind of gentrification of this place.
They actually asked us to include the piece in the exhibition. So since the room was there, they wanted to, and they some way said, I mean, this is this was like very inspiring for them. And so they said, okay, why don't you include it in the show? And we decided to say no, together with Pauline. We, since our project was really against Vatican and against Christianity,
not against,
but I mean,
against disappropriation.
Disappropriation, but again, there was also an aspect of the project that was a critic on also on the institution of the old convent and the story around that space. So to give the Vatican the center of this narration was to us really an abuse. So we said no. But then, in a strange way, they tried to use that space for guided tours. So they some way showed the space to journalists, to people, including it like more informally in the narration.
Okay. We're a little bit over, and there are 11 questions.
Oof, okay.
So we're going to try to run through them. Next, how do you think about scale and accessibility in curation? For instance, in reference to the Hillary Clinton emails, it strikes me that the content was somewhat overwhelming, but very important. The venue was situated within a practical space, but also perhaps competing with everyday commerce. It's a fascinating project, but just wanted to have you comment on those ideas of scale and accessibility a bit more. Thank you.
Now, the idea of competing with the market is very interesting, and it was somehow one of the cores of our operation, of our project. Of course, you cannot discover anything by reading some emails inside a supermarket. And I think this was clear to everyone, to all viewers. But you could somehow make people aware about their role and position in this semi-public, semi-public space. So our point was really to interrupt an habit, an habitual behavior, and make people aware about themselves. So probably our goal was smaller than revealing something about the email gate.
Yeah.
Okay. Next, A simple one. Do you have any plans to present your work in the US?
Um, I mean, we are preparing something for the US. Actually last year we presented. We had together with the SBA and Stephen, we presented our research again at SBA, and we are now publishing a new book, a couple of books. One is like about Jonas Mikas and this will be edited and published in the US and then probably launched in the US. And probably something else. We will see. We are working now with another American artist who is like in LA actually, Jennifer West, and we are presenting it again in Venice in May.
So Myrta has two questions. Did the architecture impose any constraints that shaped the exhibition narrative, and how do you see this exhibition speaking to Venice as a city, its rhythms, its tourism, its fragility?
Yeah, that's for sure. We are always concerned about the limitation of the space and how architecture regulates behaviors and even access. We used to live in Venice for some years, so we know the city and how fragile the city is, and that's partly why we are interested in developing projects in Venice at the occasion of the Venice Biennale, to show another kind of Venice, a more complex and even contradictory kind of Venice.
Yeah, and often also coming back to the previous question, it's interesting to us to create a strange compressed experience that can some way be very fast, so be perceived in 1 second or 2 minutes from someone who is completely uninterested, but then can become a huge archive for someone who is very interested. So it's interesting to see also this coexistence of levels of attention in this democracy. I mean, there is not idea of the idea of a community is like an invention. We like that we coexist sometime in a space, and there are so many levels of understanding, of attentions, that are like probably the most vertiginous part of what art can create.
Okay. Actually, there's just one more, I think. How often do you use politics and political aspects as theme and concepts?
It's an interesting question because from many of our projects, you probably don't see so clearly that we are somehow political curators or interested in the relationship between art and politics, especially because there is always this. We try to have a very accessible layer, even an aesthetic layer. Why not? So, for instance, the wall drawing inside the prison, it's a very beautiful drawing. I think so. If you see the artwork in itself, you don't see any politics in there, and yet, of course, locating such project inside these kind of institutions is a political act. You have to think that, for example, the inmates during the COVID time, so for about 2 years, were not allowed to work outside the facility, were not allowed to meet people in person. We faced a very difficult situation for them. We found the community exhausted by this kind of situation. They felt discarded by the state even more. So, of course, trying to intervene for a very small part of their lives, of course, we are not saving anyone, but intervening there was a political act. And even the communication of the project was not communication per se, but was again trying to hijack the art communication and the Biennale communication for convey a different message, for focusing on these kind of communities.
Yeah, and I think one of the most influential artwork that some way influenced our approach to art, it's not an artwork, but it's actually a manifestation that happened in Italy in 1972. It's actually it was like there was like a convention in Sanremo, so close to Genova, close to Milano, where like psychiatrists were together against homosexuality. They had like this meeting and they were discussing how homosexuality was not natural, wasn't scientifically something to
It was a disease.
a disease, of course, but then how to also to create therapies against homosexuality. And a group, the first group of homosexuals in Italy, the one that we dedicated the book for, 71, 74, decided to do an international action, which was very interesting. Basically, they decided to participate in the convention, playing the role of psychiatrists. So they applied to the manifestation, to the convention,
To the conference.
So the conference, and they came out to the conference. Then they actually came out during the conference, stopping it. And Françoise Dubon was the ecofeminist thinker from Paris, came out with this strong statement saying that homosexuality doesn't have to be integrated in the society, but has to disintegrate it rather. So this is how we like to think our political attitude.
Okay, thank you so much. With that, we'll end the roundtable. Thanks everyone for coming today, and so we'll see the two of you on the student session link now. All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks. Bye.